Today we are studying we are studying Mishpatim, which is a parsha that is just chock full of all kinds of things. I kept going off in lots of different directions, and then was reading over my notes, and then found a whole different this morning, and then found a whole different direction to go in. So I'm going to just go over, because we could stay online for the whole day, and I certainly can't do that. I have people to visit and do my thing with, and I can't stay on line all day, and I'm sure you guys can't either. So Mishpatim. I'm going to name some of the topics in it, and we may touch on some of it. And I do want to make sure that there's time if people want to jump in, because there's a lot to say about this parsha. I have a hard end at 9:30, so I will be off at 9:30. You guys can continue if you need to, but hopefully we'll be done before then. So Mishpatim is really the book of the covenant. That's what it's been kind of called. And it's the first body of Torah legislation. And it has been, I found a quote that it is how Israelite, not Israeli, Israelite society should function. It's also kind of, I mean, and we'll circle back to this, kind of ironic that we're reading that this week, because in Israel this week, today, I think even, there is a push, or there's a push for a judicial reform by the current government, which will very much impact Israeli society in so many different ways that I feel is very negative. And there have been thousands and thousands of people protesting in the streets in Israel, if you're not aware of that. Many of them are my friends, and I just found it fascinating that this was the week that we're reading Mishpatim. So we'll come back to that. And I honestly didn't want to get into a political discussion, but it might end up there. I also, one of the things that popped into my head when I was reading through the portion is that the Israelites, 2 weeks ago in Bo, the Parashat Bo, which I think I also taught. Why? I think it was 2 weeks ago. Anyways, Moses asks, or is demands of Pharaoh that the Israelites should be able to leave, not in a general sense of freedom, but that they be free to leave so they can go worship their God. And I mean, that is the phrasing, as far as I remember. And it made me start thinking about why were the Israelites, I mean, like I asked, why were the Israelites afraid? We celebrate freedom and coming out of a dark space and all kinds of things through many rituals. We say it every day in our prayers. But what is the true meaning of that freedom? Did we just basically trade one, slavery for a kind of an obligatory freedom, which is in a way slavery itself? And then there's also so many wonderful specific commandments that are mentioned that I could go on and on and on for days about. I mean, of course, the first being the strangers, that we should treat the strangers kindly, in particular the strangers, well, not even strangers, but in particularly widows and orphans. And in some ways I find that ironic, especially when you place it side by side with the what's going on in Israel today. The idea of kashrut is in there, and the interpretation of that is, I mean, the phrase is, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And so those who took that, the rabbis who kind of came up with the laws, took that and ran with it in a direction that I don't necessarily think I agree with. I think it's more about how you treat people and human beings as well as animals. Um, I mean, that's why we also don't aren't supposed to get eggs from a nest with its, from under its mother. We make the mother fly away first. Um, and then there's also, when going back to the widow and orphan, there's also about, I was started thinking about transitions, that um, these are times of transition when you become a widow, when you are an orphan. Um, we those When someone's going through transitions, I find that is their most vulnerable time. I mean, we're always transitioning, but especially in terms of when someone loses a loved one, when someone moves from their home, when someone gets a divorce, when somebody, I mean, that's a very vulnerable time for everyone. So I found that very interesting. And then I also found some really interesting um, notes on some of the rabbis that of what they said. So now that I've told you all these wonderful topics that we could jump into, and it's almost time's almost up. I'm just gonna I want you guys to jump in, but I'm gonna try to get through some of my notes if you don't mind. So the proposition of the 2023 Israeli judicial reforms is, bottom line, I mean, there's a lot of similarities to some stuff that was happening with this. It's still happening with the current US Supreme Court, but it is intended to curb the judiciary influence over lawmaking by limiting the Supreme Court's power to exercise judicial review. And Roberta, you're the lawyer, so you might have some take on this, but you probably know this much better than I do. So, anyways,
Well, it's just that Israel has no constitution,
right,
so it's even more of an assault on democracy
right,
than what we're experiencing.
right,
And we have state constitutions here, right? That are, we have many, many more checks and balances.
right.
That's what's so scary. There's
Right.
like
It
no
takes
checks and
away
balances.
it
Yeah.
takes away the so if it's adopted, essentially, it gives the Knesset power to override the Supreme Court by a simple majority. So there's 120 members of the Knesset and 61 vote against something, they can throw it out. And on top of it, it um, changes how the judicial selection is made. So it's, that a majority of its members are appointed by the government. So it's a little scary, and it does take away the norm of checks and balances in that society. So there's, like I said, been a lot of protesting going on. At one protest, I found this pretty interesting or profound, I guess. Author David Grossman, who's an Israeli author, um, like spoke, and he said, I mean, it sounds like, for somebody just reading it, it sounds really, oh, so dramatic. But the truth is, it's very dramatic what's going on there. Um, it, he said, now is the hour of darkness. And that was at a Tel Aviv rally last month. And he continues, now is the moment to stand up and cry out, this land is in our souls. What happens in it today will determine what it will be and who we and our children will become. And I want to include that to, it will have also influence over those of us in the diaspora, those of us who are not in Israel, but are Jewish. And um, I think it really will impact us. And it basically is trying to turn Israel into a theocracy, which is rampant in our world these days. And some of the impact will be, the relationships and the work towards building bridges of peace with Palestinian neighbors, with other peoples. Um, it will especially impact education in public schools. And as we know, that's a breeding ground for extremism if we let it. Um, it's a it's definitely will impact progressive Judaism, and I like in recognizing conversions and allowing for different types of practice, and um, for funding, because a lot of the synagogues, most of the synagogues, not all, are um, receive some sort of funding from the government. And it's only been recently that, you know, conservative and reform and reconstructionist congregations could receive a little bit of funding, but they will definitely not receive funding. In fact, there may be a push to close some of the established organizations down. Um, it will certainly impact LGBTQ, and something that's very dear to my heart is the women at the wall, being able to pray. It's that organization is really, I just read an article by Yochi Rappaport in the Jerusalem Post, and she's the CEO of Women of the Wall. And you know, there was a time, and once in a while still happens, where there was even arrests made, but this time it will definitely, women will be barred from being able, women of the wall will be barred from being able to have services at the wall. So that's the first part. We could, maybe I should just stop there, and I'll leave all the rest of this for the next year. You can put me down for Mishpatim next year, because I want to give you an opportunity to comment and say some things about this, because I think this is an important topic, and it's important for us to be aware of, even if we are not necessarily a supporter of Israel at this time, but or the Israeli government at this time. I certainly don't support the government at this time, but I do support Israel, and I want to just open it up. So jump in.
Well, I'm totally with you. I'm sort of like, I don't know, like I cry more about what's going on in Israel than I do about what's going on in this country. And I can't quite figure that out, although in a way I can, but just connecting it to what I think is maybe going on in the Torah portion, and it just brings me to another question, is, you know, the Parsha starts out saying, when you have slaves in the promised land. And I'm always like, why do we need slaves in the promised land? Like, what is going on? And we see why we need, like what's going on in Israel right now, and in this country, and in Turkey, and anywhere you look at. There's something Torah understands, the really painful limitations of human society, and why we need mishpatim, you know. So it's just somehow folding back on itself, and it's really, oh, even in the promised land, look what we do and look at what we need. So it's just in like another level of Torah speaking to us today, I think.
I always find with Mishpatim, I'm on that same wavelength about the Torah recognizing so clearly human limitation, inevitably. And, you know, you say to 10 Commandments, you know, honor your father and your mother. That's one. That's just the one that just popped in my head. But when it's something as broad as that, I'm very aware of it in this country. There are so many ways to decide what that looks like in practice. Okay. And ways it can be, that's possibly a bad one, but ways in which they can be in action in complete contradiction to one another, you know? And in Mishpatim, it says, no. What we mean is you do it this way. This is what we're talking about. The scales have to be balanced evenly. That's specific. You know, we're not just saying it has to be fair. We're saying somehow, however we're doing this, it's got to be even. which is, or whatever we're talking about. It doesn't matter if they're rich or they're poor, very specifically. You don't take bribes, very specifically. Not just justice, you shall, follow justice. And so Mishpatim is in some ways, for me, it's sort of somewhat boring, but to read, but it's also, and I think I only realized it as you were talking today, how incredibly important it is to spell it out. It's this, and that's what law is really about, so much of the time. Spell it out, because you can't trust human beings at all. That's all.
On that note, it's like interpretation is so very important. And I'm trying to find this quote I read. So there was a quote in one of the readings I have. I can't attribute it at the moment, but it was that Jewish tradition, because of there's so many different interpretations, it means that Jewish tradition has never been static and unchanging. That it makes room for evolution of new insights and interpretations of how one should practice Judaism. So that, I think that's really, I think that's a huge call to the progressive movements, because and those unaffiliated, that Judaism is yours, and your interpretation matters, but also, as you said, Gail, there's a certain spelling out of what that means within that interpretation, I think.
Yeah, and the interpretations, as we know, given the range of Jewish custom, interpretation, what just popped into my head was, it would have been really nice if our Constitution had said, corporations are not people. Because leaving that interpretation open to the Supreme Court, I don't know how they got there, but they did. So that's why I love Mishpatim. Anyway.
Karen, yes.
Yeah, I'll go back, Julie, to where you started. So two things. One, of course, this Parashat does begin with how one treats one's slaves. And we could talk for hours on, wait a minute, weren't these people just slaves and now they're slave holders? Like, how does that really repair the world? Putting that aside, going back to the widows and the orphans, who are the least enfranchised, right, in the society? Who have the least rights? Slaves are one category, right, an important one, and all those, and the widows and the orphans. And so Mishpatim seems to really be putting that at the center. Why do our laws exist? And they really do exist to protect those with the least amount of power and the least amount of ability to,
yes,
to navigate in the society. And now we see, of course, in our countries, that who do the laws exist to protect? They protect those most in power. So many of our laws in the United States are written and created by who? The robber barons, the people who are trying to protect their wealth and will do whatever they need to do to encode that in the law so that the law protects them, even if justice and equity don't protect them. And so then the law is there as a bludgeon against justice in a way, in order to protect the power of those who have it and keep it in their hands. And I think, to me, that is the most exciting and compelling reason to read this Parsha every year. Thank you.
Miriam.
I was on YouTube. I came upon a speech by Biden this week when he's traveling around the country. And I have to admit, I did not know what was going on in Israel. So I'm really grateful to know that, because I was confused why he was expressing his concern with what's happening in Israel. And to me, I didn't know what was going on, but now I understand why he was expressing his grave concern for what's going on in Israel. I think it's very related, so I'm just expressing that.
I think one reason for more tears over over what's going on in Israel comes from the fact that we know we're supposed to be, we expect powerful people in the US to try to keep and increase their power. And we expect politicians to do the same. But we also know that our tradition teaches respect for and caring for the least powerful. And we were reminded over the weekend, we're supposed to be a light to the nations. How is taking away the power from the Supreme Court showing that you're a light to the nations? Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and these things are chipping away at that description of Israel as a democracy. And the decisions and actions and policies of the past many Israeli governments seem not to follow the Jewish values that we believe that we personally and as Jewish state should follow. Not to mention, I'm starting to get the same feeling I get when I go to an Orthodox congregation. They're happy to have me there, and I don't count. And so many people in the Israeli government now are forgetting the love and support that that Jews outside of Israel have felt towards the country. Like they wouldn't be there without the help and support of Jews in the diaspora. And then they're saying that we're not Jews. It's,
And there's not as much welcoming these days.
Welcoming of Americans and others?
Of Jews of progressive Jews, let's put it.
Yeah.
And who gets to be a rabbi in Israel, I think, is another important question, going back to the women at the wall. Who gets to pray at the Kotel, and who's recognized as a rabbi in Israel?
Right. I mean, there are non-Orthodox rabbis, and they have certain, but they don't get the same funding as the Orthodox. The life cycle events they perform aren't recognized. It's a theocracy.
Can't do marriages.
Right. It's a theocracy.
Conversions. Who is
Can
it?
I ask something? Since I'm not following the politics right now either, partly because I'm completely off my reality, being down south for a month or two, and so I'm wondering about what you said about the women at the wall. Could they actually prevent the women from meeting? Are there going to be barricades set up? How is this going to come about? Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
The
they'll
rabbinate already controls
right.
who can pray at the Kotel, and it was only a ruling by the Supreme Court that put a little bit of a
You can be
reversal.
arrested for wearing a talit. You can get. I mean,
Seriously?
Not currently.
I've been there when they've arrested women, pulled out selective women, rabbis from the reform movement. And by the way, I was wearing my women at the wall talit when I observed this, and they didn't touch me. So it's clearly like a political, like they go in and they know who they're going to get, and they took these women away and put them in jail.
I mean,
And
they
now
were
it's
released.
like they arrest anybody who congregates in that way and prays, and women who pray out loud. And so, yeah.
You're saying they're doing
Can I
that?
ask the question? Just like I'm thinking, there's at least 3 words for law in the Torah, right? There's
Mishpatim, Hukim, Halacha.
and Torah. And so just sort of back to what both Julie and Gail were saying, there's like something really, and Karen and everybody, we're all saying, there's something particular, like the Mishpatim are like the particular, like, what is it?
They're considered the law. I mean, that's what it's. They're the 613 mitzvot, the Mishpatim, and the rabbis go on and on and on about, like, there's positive, there's negative, there's between God and people, there's between people and other people. I mean, but it's the mitzvot. And by the way, one of the things, as a Jewish educator, it used to drive me crazy when I would say, well, what's a mitzvah to my students? And they would say, oh, it's a good deed. And I'm like, is keeping kosher a good deed? And I've tried to explain, there are many good deeds in our laws, but there are not necessarily, not all of them are good deeds, so that you can't use the word mitzvah just as a blanket of good deeds.
Right. That's a more modern understanding of the word. But there are, I think, one of the differences between Hukim and Mishpatim is that the Mishpatim have reasons, or it's easy to understand the reasons.
Could you be clear what the three different
Kashrut,
things
there's
are?
not a reason to understand.
What?
Wait.
The kashrut laws.
But that's a hok. That's one of the Hukim. The kashrut laws don't have reasons. The 10 utterances say, so that you may live long and prosper in the land that I'm about to give you. And some of the other ones do too. The take care of the earth, of the land, and the sabbatical years and like that are all because to remind us to rest. There are reasons given, but there are no reasons given when we get to Shmini. It just says, this is what you can eat, this is what you can't eat. No reason at all. And some of the reasons that we've heard down through the years are human attempts to explain why, but the Torah does not give God words to explain or reasons. There are certain commandments that we accept on ourselves because we understand that they come from the divine. Avigail?
Yeah, I was going to say that there are rules that don't make sense because you trust that they come from God.
Yeah.
And that you're connecting to God, and that's somebody else's interpretation of what it is, but
Yeah.
I can say goodbye, everybody. I'm sorry.
Have a good day. Thanks for starting
Thank you
this.
so much, Julie. Thank you for opening this. Thank you.